Welcome to the Rex Andrews Show. Glad to have you with us. If you are a first-time listener, thank you very much. We welcome you to the show and like to have you do two things for us. Now, number one, I'm not bashful and I can be a beggar. And in fact, I got a caller on today, so I'm a well-dressed beggar. So if you like what we're doing, give us those 5 stars. It helps us for placement in the app stores. Okay, the other thing too is why don't you just subscribe? So that way you can get all the updates when we have new episodes coming out. We'd like to thank our existing users, those that come back, and I have this little feature thing that I'm doing now that's kind of fun, is welcoming audiences in different places. And I'd like to welcome those in Hugh, Ohio. If you haven't been to Hugh, maybe you need to go. All right, so we've got an exciting guest to have with us today. In a genre of nothing we've ever done in this area, so that's always fun. We get to meet somebody new. But one of the things, even though you can find us all over social media and all that good stuff, 23 different app distribution points for the podcast, I do suggest that you stop by the show website. Now, the reason for that is one, we have our guests on and we interview them and they tell us lots of interesting things, but we don't get to hear the full story. So on our website, we've got their social media links, their website links, those types of things. So that way you can get the rest of the story type of thing. So please stop by rexandrewshow.com. All right, enough of all of that housekeeping stuff. Got an exciting guest with us today. She is a very interesting young lady. I get to call her young lady because I know I'm older than she is. And she's a very interesting because, like I said, we've never had somebody from this genre. So let me tell you a few things about her before we get her fully introduced. She's a writer and an author. She's got a book submitted for publication coming up. So she's pretty excited about that. We're going to talk about this. She talks a lot about happiness being a skill. Okay. And she's somewhat of a survivor of the medical treatment of our wonderful mental health care system. She is a professional chef, and this is the one that really excites me because we've not had a professional chef on the show. And she has the award-winning moniker as the Food Network Chop Champion. And we'll talk about that today too. So welcome to the show, Brooke Siem. Brooke, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Glad to have you on the show. I understand you're dialing into us today from Reno, Nevada, where you said it's actually snowing. It's May 20th, and it's snowing in Reno.
It is literally snowing right outside my window. It's fabulous.
Well, you've got that sweater on. I was kind of wondering if you were out in the polar places. You know, the show is distributed. I forgot to mention this. We always do. The show is actually listened to in 32 countries across 6 continents, almost 500 cities. And if we could figure out how to market to penguins and help them charge their cell phones, we'd have listeners in Antarctica too. So, Brooke, gosh. You know, on our show, we like to tell people stories because success doesn't fall out of the sky. It just doesn't happen to people. We are accumulation of where we are today based on our experiences, our talents, and things in life. So we like to go back, and you don't have to worry about writing this list down because I'll ask you these questions. We want to know where you were born, okay, and where you were raised because that can be different sometimes. I have a guest on the show, Ellie Soja, who, amazingly enough, moved 63 times before she was the age of 15. So I'm pretty sure you haven't moved that many times, but we'd like to know where you grew up because that is influence. The next thing we want to know is, do you have siblings? And then if you have siblings, if any of them survived your torment, we want to know about the things you were interested in as a kid. Okay. So did you do sports or dance, theater, computers, photography, shoplifting? And don't think that's out of question. I had a guest by age 15 was a car thief. So a little bit about that. And then your parents, what your parents did or do. That's a big influence. Parental influence is huge in our lives. It can be a great support mechanism. It can be something that was hands off, or it could be an example in our lives of, hey, I don't want to be anything like that. Okay, so there. Hopscotch around your education a little bit. Can't wait to learn about becoming a professional chef and all that. And then we'll just kind of see where things go. So Brooke, if you could, where were you born?
I was born in Reno, Nevada, raised in Reno, Nevada as well. And then my father actually passed away when I was 15. And so that kind of, it was very sudden, and that put my hometown of Reno on a little bit of, it just left a sour taste in my mouth. And so once he passed, I was pretty intent on getting out of Reno and getting as far away as possible. So I went to college in Middlebury, Vermont,
Wow, that's
because
a
it's very
hop.
far from Nevada.
Very
Yes.
far.
And then I moved to New York City after that because I loved New York, and I'd spent most of my childhood kind of only really having a long-term interest in two things. The first was ballet and movement in general. I loved gymnastics. I loved ballet. Still love them both to this day. And so, if you're an aspiring ballerina, you go to New York to train. And so that's what I did. And after spending a few summers in New York training, I kind of knew that, well, maybe I didn't want to go the full professional dance route, but I did fall in love with New York. So I wanted to live there.
Fantastic.
And
Okay, so let me
yeah.
back you up just a little bit, okay? So before your father passed away suddenly, and my condolences on that, what type of work or occupation was your father?
My parents owned a collection agency. So they, they owned a local collection agency in town that served all of Nevada. Nevada has changed a lot in recent years, and it's becoming, apparently Reno's a really hot place to live now, which I still can't wrap my head around, because when I was growing up here, it, was not a place that people really voluntarily wanted to come. And kind of Nevada as a whole was like that. So my parents ran, in my opinion, a very respectable agency. They did not stronghold people. They tried to work with everyone and basically run what is a very negative industry in the most positive way possible.
Fantastic.
And so my dad's job was to drive all around the state, work, meeting with clients or going to court or dealing with debtors. And so he spent a lot of time on the road and away doing that. And then my mom was back in the office running, the actual day-to-day business with the employees and whatnot. And they did that together until my dad passed. And then my mom ran it for another 20 years after that.
Okay, so question for you. With your dad being so busy and on the road, was he fully engaged in your life, or was he weekend dad? I mean, I'm not trying to pick on anybody. I'm just trying to understand his influences, because it makes a difference. I've talked to so many people who had very, very successful parents, but it was like they never saw them.
So I was raised, I think, in a fairly, on the outside, it looked very normal. We were kind of, solid upper middle class, and I'm the only child. And so, from the outside, it looked very normal, very typical. And in a lot of ways it was, but we also had a lot of kind of, I would almost call it like radical honesty in the house. And as a result, our day-to-day lives were different. So my mom and dad they never minced words. They were so honest with each other all the time that a therapist once told them that if everybody in the world interacted like they did, she would be out of a job. And so that's not to say it was necessarily always positive. My father, I think that today he would be diagnosed as bipolar 2, no question. He had some periods of really rather intense sort of mania, followed by long bouts of not being asleep at 2 p.m. through depressive periods.
Yep.
He had a rough childhood, and he had a huge amount of anger stored up in him, and would have these epic temper tantrums where things would go flying around the house. And while it was never really directed like at us as people, just kind of being around that all the time, I thought it was kind of normal. And so if you kind of take that really intense kind of water buffalo in a china shop personality and then put it in a relationship, there was a lot of words flying around all the time and a lot of communication. And so the negative side of that is that it wasn't always the most calm environment for a child, but the positive side of that is that nobody was really wandering around being anyone who they weren't. There was no sense of trying to put on airs or hiding what you need or want because of the other person. And so as a result, we had a situation where basically my dad would travel during the week and I would be with my mom. And then by the time he got home on, Friday or whatnot, my mom would be like, I need a break, go away. And my dad would take me up to a little cabin we had in the woods and we'd spend the weekend together.
Nice.
So for me, it was really quite wonderful because I got dedicated time with each of them.
Yeah.
And I never felt unloved. I never felt destabilized despite some of the intensity that was in the house. But it was certainly not typical for people to just openly say, like, you need to leave, take the kid, go away, and then we'd go, and it was fine, and nobody had hard feelings about it. So
Okay, that makes sense. What did you study in school? You went clear out to Vermont for college. What were you studying?
I didn't know. I mean, I went to college because I was never really into school. I was good at it, but I didn't feel any pull to be in school. And I went to college because that's just what was expected of me. It was what was required. And so I pretty much wandered around a college, catalog, trying to find something that gave me some sort of spark, and really nothing did. And I would kind of turn that back onto the fact that, after my dad died, I mean, I was medicated with a whole bunch of drugs. I fell into a depression. There just wasn't really much passion anywhere in my life. And so when people are running around saying, find your passion, I was kind of not, I never really got that. I still don't get that. But as a 19-year-old in college, that's a real frustrating place to be. So I ultimately majored in history, and like literally no focus, just history as a concept, which is, I came out with nothing from an academic standpoint. I have a great degree from a grade school, but it was useless. And so when I graduated, it was, kind of like, well, what are you going to do now? I really didn't know. I didn't want to continue on with education. I didn't want to go get a job, at Goldman Sachs, like all my friends were doing at the time. And I sat down with my mom one day and she pretty much said, well, as far as I'm concerned, the only thing you've ever consistently liked your whole life other than dance was cooking. And I said, well, that's true. And so I just made the decision to go to culinary school out of more or less not knowing what else to do with myself, but at least I knew I liked that. And so I went to culinary school in New York City.
Fantastic. Ballet is such a great thing for movement. All three of my daughters danced. And, people who don't understand dance don't understand that ballet is the core. That's the foundation of any type of dance. Because once you master ballet, then you can do anything else because you understand movement, and stuff. So, that big day when you get your point shoes and those kinds of things. So, fantastic. So you went to culinary school, huh?
Yeah, I did. I went to the Institute of Culinary Education in New York,
Okay.
and it was like a nighttime program. So I got jobs in restaurants during the day. I started off as I had grand ambitions from early on that I knew I wanted to work in higher end kitchens. And so I also knew that I wasn't likely to be hired in a higher end kitchen for a million reasons. One, I was still in culinary school. I was a woman, and a small one at that, which there's, a lot of well-known sexism in the industry, and it was still running strong at that point. And so I strategized and I took a job as a coat check girl at Bar Boulud, which is a fancy French restaurant in the Upper West Side across the street from Lincoln Center. And it's the kind of place where celebrities would come in and have, a nice frou-frou meal before they went off to the show at Lincoln Center. And so it was a very controlled environment in that I had to act a certain way and, be a certain kind of person. But that was fine for me because I was just angling to get in the kitchen the whole time.
Sure.
I started bugging the chef until I bugged him to the point of annoyance where he said, fine, you can come in on your day off and basically pick parsley for me for 14 hours. And I said, great. And so I did. And after that, he offered me a job in the kitchen, which is what I wanted all along. So I took a pay cut. I literally cut what was already a meager salary in half in order to go downstairs and work in the kitchen.
Wow.
And so I spent most of my culinary school career working at the kitchen at Bar Boulud, kind of, learning on the job and then going to school at night.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, having your salary cut in half in New York is a big thing because New York is not a cheap place to live.
I went from $14 an hour to $7.25.
Oh my word.
It
How
was
did you
2008, 2009.
how did you survive? That's horrible.
I mean, I had to have help, and I was lucky in the sense that, I had support from my mom to help me get through that
Nice.
period of time. And, um, I know that a lot of people don't have that. And at that point, it was just the two of us, and it's been the two of us from now on. So just the kind of support and bond we have has been incredibly helpful in many ways, including financially when I was making $7 an hour in New York.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. You couldn't even afford a few slices of pizza at $7 an hour in New York City. So
No, I didn't. I mean, well, I would get. I did make friends with the pizza guy around the corner from my apartment because he would sell me slices for like $1.25 at 11 o'clock at night. But otherwise, I was, a small person working in a kitchen, so I was surrounded by food a lot. And being in culinary school too, I would come home with lots of food. So
well, that's
I was never want for food for
never
a
one for
period of
food.
time.
Never one for food. Okay. So how long did you work there? I mean, once you got done with culinary school, did you get another job? Did you elevate there? What was the next hop?
Yeah, I worked in kitchens for I'd say about a year and a half. From there, from Barbalud, I went to WD50, which at the time was a one Michelin starred restaurant in Lower East Side and Clinton Street, and it was really known for being one of the first restaurants to do foams and gels and turning a fruit into little bubbles, and just the creativity and the chemistry was amazing.
Hmm.
But after being there for a little while, I had a lot of leftover injuries from my ballet career that were really kind of nagging at me, from the 14-hour days. And then also, I realized pretty quickly that I was not interested in executing somebody else's vision. I
Okay.
liked I liked the learning, but I wanted to be more kind of in charge of my own creative endeavors. And I didn't know what that looked like. I was 23 at the time. And so I also thought, well, I'm in the industry now. The recession had hit hard. I I stayed with what I knew. And so I just worked my way through a bunch of other aspects of the industry. I did purchasing. So I was not in the kitchen, but I was managing like the inventory coming in and out for gigantic restaurants in New York.
Mhm.
I did a season of winemaking in Bedell Cellars out in Long Island. I did really, really high end catering for incredibly fancy people, was an absurd experience. It just blew my mind that there were people who, I mean, literally like being told not to look at people. Like I kind of lived in that world for a little bit. That was bizarre.
Oh man,
And
I can relate to that because right out of college, I went to I moved down to Arizona, and got involved in working for a catering company, and we were the bar service, and we did these parties for all the high end things, high end folks of all kinds. The Bush family, like Anheuser Busch
yes,
family, and
yeah,
people with more money. I mean, at one party, they had me with a stick. I mean, it's long pole, and my entire job was to make sure the candles in the pool were spaced correctly, and that's all I did. I was supposed to
wow,
be the second bartender, and they decided they didn't need the second bar, so they had me with a stick pushing candles around all night.
oh
And I
my
was
god,
like, "You got to be kidding me!" No, I mean I could relate to that environment. I mean, people with more
yeah,
money than sense, and oh my goodness,
hmm
yeah, crazy stuff.
yeah.
So,
I remember there was this one client. It was a CEO of some gigantic company, and they had this gigantic apartment, penthouse apartment somewhere in the 50s in Manhattan. And this was actually, I think I quit this job pretty soon after this because it was kind of the last straw for me, where this client had this obsession with opulence. So every time he and the wife too, every time the two of them would throw a party for any employees, they just kept saying, we want it to feel opulent, and then like there's just kind of, I imagine when you have those photos, those old paintings of kings that are covered in, there's someone holding a grape for them and there's all this gold and fruit around. It was kind of like that's the energy they wanted. So even if you had a party with 30 people, you would have 15 pies and 2 cakes and a whole goose and a whole turkey and whole fishes. And it was just this smorgasbord of choices for the 30 people that might have showed up, and people's pictures encased in ice. And the amount of food we had left over was, I mean, like probably hundreds of pounds of food. I'm not exaggerating about how much food we had left over. And they wouldn't let us take it or give it away. They actually forced us to throw it all out because they wouldn't let any of the staff eat it, and they wouldn't let us. I mean, in my head, I was like, can I just take this onto the street where there are 25 homeless people outside?
Sure.
Like, let's do something with it. And they made us throw it all away. I remember throwing away these whole beautiful fishes and plates of untouched food. And that, to me, I just could not square that mindset with the place that I wanted to be involved with. And so I said, I got to be done with this.
No, I understand that. I'll spin off of that. Same type of thing we would have at the bars. The clients always they bought the alcohol, okay, and if any had been opened, you had to get rid of it. So you couldn't, and they were never left with the client, and it would be hundreds and hundreds of dollars because we might give one shot of vodka or one shot of tequila to somebody and stuff. Well, we learned that we didn't have to fully throw it out. So here we are, my buddy and I, and we were just out of college, so 22, and we constantly had a flow of free alcohol. It was crazy. I mean, cases and cases of champagne and beer and, all this stuff. And once we learned that people would just throw it out, we would crack a bottle of something, pour a shot, throw it down the drain, and then put the lid back on. And then the inventory, then, it's been opened, and we get rid of it. And we got rid of it to ourselves. It was terrible.
I would do the same thing. I would not some occasionally with booze, not really, but I would literally smuggle out like whole fish. And it wasn't even things like that had been on, like, I guess I could understand if it had been on display and been sitting out for 6 hours and people had picked at it. Maybe you don't want that, but I'm talking about the second fish we had in the refrigerator that nobody ever
that nobody
touched,
even saw.
right?
Yeah.
So I would start smuggling stuff out, and then I lived, in New York. There's doorman buildings, so I would come back at midnight. My doormans would be half asleep, and I would just be like, "You want some crudité? Like, here's some fish tacos." It's just everybody eat.
That's funny because because we didn't do any food, okay, so we were just a bar. So the catering companies, and we worked with pretty much the same catering companies, because it was the high-end companies. There were about 3 or 4 we worked with. So we had a currency. It was trade food for booze. So we literally we'll give you a bottle of this, let us have a tray of that kind of thing. And so we were never want for food or alcohol, but no, I certainly understand that environment. But to the average person, it makes no sense. It makes no sense at all.
I don't understand how it makes sense to any person.
Yeah.
I mean, to any person, I don't understand how it makes sense. Like, I don't understand, how are you so far removed from society or whatnot to, why do you care what happens to the fish you're not going to eat that no one touched? But it's because they paid for it.
Yeah.
But they didn't want somebody else to have it. It's just so bizarre. I couldn't do it anymore.
Okay, so you stepped out of catering. What was your next hobby? So, sorry for the squirrel path there for a minute, but
I like the squirrel path. They're more interesting. So after that, I then I was unemployed. I mean, I voluntarily left that catering company, and what had happened at that point is I had met my future business partner. I didn't really know it at the time, but I was applying for jobs. I was kind of over being in the physical kitchen. So I was applying for jobs like, special events managers and all these things, because I did have so much experience with special events through being a chef. And so I kind of wasn't getting anywhere though. Like, I was just, there's only so many times you can spend on, Indeed.com or something and networking. And so I just run out of time real quick. And so I started baking to pass the time. And I also had a lot of friends who had birthdays and whatnot, and I was on unemployment. I didn't really feel like I could afford to maybe celebrate their birthday with them at the fancy restaurant they were going to. So I
Mm-hmm.
would make cupcakes in my house and give them to them as their happy birthday gift. And I had a friend who's getting married and she was having a bachelorette party and she loved Cosmos. And so I said, well, I wonder if I can make a Cosmo cake that's actually alcoholic. And I kind of reached back into my file cabinet of my experience at WD-50 when I was doing a lot, I was doing more chemistry than cooking, it felt like. And there was a technique that I had learned where I could turn liquids into gels. And so I
Okay.
started experimenting with this technique with booze. And as it turns out, I was able to create gels out of pure booze. So I could create a rum gel or a vodka gel or whatever it was. And these gels didn't break down over time and they didn't seep into the cake. So I started realizing that, oh, I can, what's in a Cosmo? Lime, cranberry juice, and vodka,
Right.
maybe a little triple sec. So I said, okay, well, what if I make a lime cake and then make a cranberry vodka filling with an triple sec frosting, and I made it and it worked. When you bit into it, you had this sensation of having a cocktail because it wasn't overly sweet. You got the bitterness from the cranberry, you got the hit of booze, and it was just this kind of idea and taste sensation that I had never experienced before. So I made this cake for the bachelorette party. It went over really well. And then I started experimenting for my friends who had birthdays and events. And the next thing you know, I have this little mini line of cocktail cupcakes that are also all alcoholic and filled with like legitimate booze. At this point, I was doing it for fun, but I had met my future business partner and she was a bartender. She was looking to get out of her,
Mm-hmm.
bartending thing. And so we partnered up very casually with the intention of just having this be a little side hustle where we could hang out and drink a margarita on a Tuesday, make some margarita cupcakes. And it just started taking off in a very organic word of mouth way. And I think it's really a testament to what it could be to be in New York when you have an idea that works, because I happened to be friends with someone who worked at Google, and once he tried the cupcakes, the next thing you knew, he had me have a meeting with the head chef at Google and we catered a few of their Google parties, right?
Oh, wow.
That happened just through following the random doors that were opening, not because we were, hustling. We were just
Yeah.
taking opportunity as it showed up. And after kind of getting that client and getting to a point where I was baking illegally out of my kitchen and, pretending like we had a real kitchen and we didn't, faking until you make it, if you will, we eventually decided, let's do a real brick and mortar shop. And so we got one in the Lower East Side and a tiny little shop that produced a lot of cupcakes. And we did that for 5-6 years before it shut down. And in that period of time, we got a book, whole lot of press, and no one was rich by any means, but we had a little place in New York that survived in the black by selling cupcakes for $2 each, which in retrospect is a lot more impressive than it felt at the time.
Well, that's incredible. So I have an odd question. When you're making these gels, were you having to use something like pectin in them, or what were you creating? What was the solidifier? I mean, a little bit of chemistry back. Magic, huh?
Rex. Yes.
All right, I won't make you give up your secrets, but I've been around kitchens and involved in a company that did dressings and just all kinds of stuff. So I'm like, what is she using to get the
It was not
consistency?
pectin.
Okay, all right, fair enough. We'll leave it at magic dust. We'll leave it at magic dust. So we'll call it Peter Pan thickener, and we'll leave it at that. So fantastic. All right. Well, okay. You did that 5-6 years. You shut down the alcoholic cupcake shop. What was next?
It's called. So the bakery was called Prohibition Bakery. Our book is also Prohibition Bakery.
Prohibition
and
Bakery.
so what happened was that's kind of where my world started to collide into the what I consider to be the hero's journey of my own life. I feel like everyone has one of those, and that's where mine kind of started. So despite the fact that I literally made cupcakes for a living. How hard could my life have been? I was running the business was hard. My business partner and I had some classic business partnership problems. Our relationship was incredibly strained. Trying to survive in a New York City market. I mean, there was just all those things you would expect existed in our business. And then just combined with the fact that at this point I was massively depressed. I'd been on the same medications that were prescribed to me when I was 15. They hadn't been changed. I was just getting more and more depressed as the years were going on. And it just kind of all came to a head around my 30th birthday, which was in 2016. So at that point, we had been running the bakery for 4 years. And I was having memory problems, and I didn't know really what was going on, because to me, I didn't feel like I was having memory problems, but I was starting to notice with people around me, my business partner in particular, she would say, we talked about this yesterday.
Yeah.
We talked about A yesterday and you just did B. And in my head, there was literally no recollection of talking about A.
Yeah.
And so
do you mind if I ask you what they had you on?
Yeah, so I was on a combination of Effexor XR and Wellbutrin XL. Those were the psychiatric drugs I was on at the time.
Okay.
But I was also, what had happened is that right after my dad died, nobody knows what to do with a 15-year-old when their dad dies. And so I was having, in addition to all the grief and the depression and whatnot, I started to have a bunch of physical symptoms as well. So I got diagnosed with low thyroid. So I was also on the generic medication Synthroid. I was on something called sucralfate because I was diagnosed with bile reflux disease, which is basically there's too much bile in your body and you randomly throw up.
Sure.
So I was on sucralfate. I was also on birth control, which is very common, and isotretinoin, which is to help maintain your skin if you have bad acne. So all of these things kind of happened all at once. And so I went from, never really having a prescribed medication in my body when I was 14 to, by the time I was 16, up to 6-7 pills a day.
Ooh.
And they were all put on me all at once. And so by the time I hit 30, I was still taking that same cocktails. They had never been, no psychiatrist, doctor, or pharmacy had ever looked at what I was taking and asked the questions of not only drug interaction, but, why are you still on the same set of drugs as you were on when you were 15?
Yeah,
are you still wearing the same clothes you were wearing when you were 15?
Right.
Right? Like, I was a literal child then, and now I was, a grown-ass adult, and nobody had questioned this. And so therefore I didn't either. I just assumed that everything was fine, that if there was a problem, someone would have said it. But in retrospect, that was a failure of the system that I was in, but I also wasn't seeking out my own help at the time. And my GP at that point was prescribing all of my drugs. I saw him literally once every 2 years. And so there was just kind of no reason to think that something was maybe going wrong in the background.
Right.
But then when I was having these memory problems that were sort of corroborated by not only my business partner, but also my mother, who would talk to me on the phone, and she would bring something up and I would have no recollection of it. She just, for a few years, she just kept kind of saying, like, God, you don't remember anything. And I think we thought it was trauma initially, and it maybe some of it was, but it just got to a point where she started saying, like, do you think these are the drugs you're on? And I said, no, couldn't be. One, in my head, I'm like, if I'm like depressed and, at one point I was suicidal. I'm like, if I'm suicidal on these drugs, could you imagine how I would be off of them? Like, there's no way we can get off of them. It's just not an option. And so I held that line for a really long time. But then what happened was I hit my 30th birthday, and my father died in 2001, and this was 2016. And so I had kind of I was rather wrapped up in the idea of numbers and time, and I still am to some degree. And so I had kind of realized that because I was medicated around the age of 15, now that I was hitting my 30s, not only was I now alive, like I had spent twice, this is a little hard to verbalize, I had spent twice the amount of time on Earth than I had with I'd spent longer without my dad than I had with him, if that makes sense. Yes. There we go. That's what I was trying to say. Because if I got 15 years with him and now I was edging into that 16th year, And there was something about that that was really destabilizing, to realize more than half my life was now without him.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had this thought that occurred right after that, was like, well, if you've spent more than half your life without your dad, you've also now spent more than half your life on all of these medications,
Yeah.
and for your entire adulthood. And I just kind of had this, it was like just someone just dropped this thought into my head, and I kind of realized, wait a second, this might be really screwed up. Like, I don't know what my baseline is in any way. I don't know who I might be without these medications. I'm assuming that it's just someone who's, critically depressed, which might be the case, but I also starting to wonder, like, if I literally can't remember a conversation we had yesterday, what other decisions have I been making in my life without understanding, like, the process of getting to that decision? And how is that affecting the place I am? Because I wasn't happy. I was suicidal at that point. I hated my business. I hated everything about it. I wanted out of New York. I couldn't fathom the idea of having to live for another 50, 60 years. And so, but I also, I think, was given this gift of, who might you be if you weren't on these medications?
Right.
And then what happened at the same time, like literally within about a week of that, is I got an opportunity to travel around the world for a year.
Wow.
When that happened, there was this, it was just one of those moments where I just kind of knew that I couldn't not take that opportunity to travel. I also knew that I couldn't, or I was not sure I was going to be able to get my drugs reliably. We weren't going to Paris, we were going to Cambodia. So
right.
I wasn't sure if I was really going to be able to get them. And I knew I couldn't walk around with a suitcase of 7 drugs for a year. And on top of all that, I was really worried that I was actually going to forget a lot of that experience. And so that's when I said, okay, well, maybe let me go see a different doctor, because mine hasn't been, at all proactive on this. And let's see if I can get off these drugs and discover what my baseline is, in order to, at the time, it was in order to figure out what other drugs I would need to be on, what would the formulation would need to be.
Right.
But I knew I needed, like, intuitively, I knew I needed to discover the baseline in order to know what was going on. And so I started going on that journey. I did go to a different psychiatrist, and I told her what my plan was, and about the traveling, and she was incredibly unsupportive, really cold, had no support with the idea that I wanted to come off these drugs. And at that point, I was pissed. And I was like, well, look, we have 6 months before I get on a plane to Malaysia. Yeah. So I think that you're either with me or you're not, because I have to do this one way or the other. So she kind of begrudgingly, she told me to go off one of the drugs, cold turkey at that point, because I was on the lowest dose, and was basically like, call me in a month. And that's pretty much when my whole world went boom and exploded, is when I stopped taking that first drug.
Wow. So, I can completely relate to that. I've been on, those who follow me lengthily, I am 22 years into a diagnosis of bipolar 2. And then it's been called all kinds of things. And some there, I've been on 11 different combinations of medication. I've never had a baseline break anywhere. So I understand what it's like to be in the midst of that, where you just feel like you're a lab rat. You're just a chemical experience. These different combinations. Now I have a question for you. Did you have problems with, like, word searching, or was it just general forgetfulness?
It was just general forgetfulness. I never had any, like, it was the kind of thing where no one would have noticed it had they not been dealing with me on a day-to-day basis. And I don't even think my business partner realized that there was a memory thing going on. I just think she thought
you were just flaky. Yeah.
Bitch.
Yeah. Okay. So your world blew up. What happened?
So, for context, so this was 2016. The world of antidepressant withdrawal and the awareness of that is starting to shift. I also feel it's important for me to say that I am not a doctor. Nothing I say is medical advice. But there was what was going on at the time, what's going on now, and the true assumptions of this are all, it's very, I mean, like many things, we've been told a story that is not necessarily true. But so what happened is that I was told to go off one of the drugs cold turkey because I was on the lowest dose. It wasn't that she was like, oh, you're on 200 milligrams of this, just stop taking it. It was that there was no way at the time to take me down to a smaller dose. I couldn't go to the pharmacy and say, give me a smaller dose. It didn't exist. And because there at that point, there's been very little literature on withdrawal anyway. And at that point, there was almost none. And so she didn't, as far as I know, didn't think I had any other options. So her solution was to say, okay, go off this one drug, cold turkey, and go off the effects are cold turkey. And here's some Prozac to help you manage the withdrawal side effects. They should only last you maybe a day or two, a couple weeks at most. It should feel like a mild flu.
Oh my goodness.
That's what I walked out of there with more drugs and
a drug to take you off the drug. Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Right. And I literally walked out of there feeling like I don't think I'm down with this. I mean, I understood, at least based on what she was telling me, that the point of the Prozac was that it's easier to get off of, so therefore it's like a bridge. But I had a deep intuitive reaction for that and said, I'm not going to do this because my father had spent a lot of his life on Prozac and he was a different person and hated it. And so my thought was that if there's any genetic component to the way we react to drugs here, I've seen how my father reacted on this drug. It was bad. I'm not going to do it. So I also didn't know what I was getting into. So I did what I said. And the next day I didn't take the Effexor. I'm still taking everything else. And anyone who's Effexor is notoriously difficult to get off of. It's one of the most difficult antidepressants to get off of. Part of the reason is it has a very short half-life. So it gets in your system quickly and it leaves quickly. So it's not like, it's like walking into a waterfall, not just having a nice light drizzle, right? So when it goes away, for me, I would know if I missed a dose. My heart would start pounding. I would kind of feel like I had about 10 cups of coffee. I always felt like sound seemed a little further away. And it would take me a minute or two. And then I'd realize, oh, I missed a dose. Oh, crap. So I'd, go home and get it and I'd be fine. And so the first day or two was kind of like that. But I was certainly moody and all the kind of things you'd expect, but it was tolerable. But what happened is the first time I kind of had a moment of realizing that getting off these drugs was not just going to be, I think I had the assumption that the way I felt while I was on them was the way I was going to feel while I was off of them. And there just might be a little bit of having the flu in between.
Yeah, no.
Yeah. And what happened is I think about 3-4 days in, I hadn't had it. I remember very distinctly, I was walking on about 36th Street and Park Avenue in New York on the east side. And it started to rain. And it was a very early spring. So it was warm. I was wearing short sleeves for the first time in a long time from coming out of a New York City winter. And it started to rain. And it was like in this one moment, it was as if I had been covered in cellophane and I didn't know it. And someone just ripped the cellophane off of me.
Oh my
goodness. Every cell and every sense in my body, it's like someone turned the lights on. I mean, literally, I remember standing there and I kind of felt it happen and it was dusk. So people were turning their headlights on. And I remember watching the headlights go from something that looked kind of like a blurry orb to a very, very distinct star. I was suddenly aware of all the sounds of the umbrellas opening around me and the noise from the street. It was like someone literally turned up the volume. Everything got a little brighter and my colors intensified. And then I was standing there. I mean, people probably weren't noticing me because it's New York. Nobody notices anything. Right. But I was just standing there kind of almost paralyzed in my awareness. And because it was raining, I started to notice that I could feel the individual raindrops on my skin and that they hurt. It was like someone was hitting me with BB guns. And I was both kind of overcome with awe at the fact that I was feeling individual droplets on my skin as opposed to just getting wet, if that makes sense. but I was also very confused because it hurt. It felt like my skin was so sensitive that the raindrops were hurting me. And so I think I stood there for a couple minutes and took myself home. And it was just this, it was a moment where I realized that I had crossed some sort of threshold where everything I thought I knew about who I was and how I was acting and the choices I made in my life was made through this lens of cellophane in which I wasn't taking everything in.
Mm-hmm.
And I was pretty aware of that pretty early on. And it kind of lit a fire under me that I think was really, I mean, I'm really grateful for in retrospect, because my withdrawal started to get so bad that every time, I mean, I was seeing really scary visions, like homicidal and suicidal visions in my head. When I would go out onto the street, I couldn't be outside because the noise and the intensity of everything was
Mm-hmm.
would literally crumple me. I was getting these it was eventually diagnosed as something called nodular vasculitis. It basically felt like my skin was on fire because the blood vessels were getting super inflamed. And I
Wow.
had these big purple splotches all over my body and these lumps that were sensitive to the touch, close on my skin because it hurt. And
Mm.
then the rage I had such terrible rage and mood swings that I got so angry at one point that I had bent a metal ironing board in half. I'm a
My
small
goodness.
person. I weigh about 120 pounds, but it was like the Hulk rage that was through me. It was the only thing. It was like either destroy myself or destroy something around me. I was ironing at the time, and I bent the
Right.
thing in half. And so that started going on for, I mean, months. And I had to work from home. I would go into the bakery once a week, and basically it was like I'd be, sobbing or really angry, and a customer would come in, and I would hold myself together just long enough to like get the customer out of the way. So I was still trying to operate the best I could, but throughout all of this, what I was starting to realize was that like I just didn't have any idea of who I was anymore. And even though there was all this really awful aspects of withdrawal, there were also some other things happening. Like I felt creative for the first time in 15 years. I went out and bought watercolors, and I couldn't sleep anymore. I went from being able to sleep for 15, 16 hours a day while I was medicated to not being able to sleep at all. So I would stay up in the middle of the night painting because TV was too loud and I couldn't really have the lights on. So I would paint with watercolors, which I'm terrible at, but that wasn't the point. The point is that I wanted to do it. I noticed that, and sometimes the lightness, I would like laugh a little bit more organically. My colors were literally brighter. And when I would talk to my mom, I mean, she was the only person picking up the phone anytime I called. But when she picked up the phone, she would say, sometimes she was like, I know this is not helpful for you right now, but you sound like you sound like a kid. Like the intonation in your voice is literally different than it has been the past 15 years. And so those little signs combined with that feeling of having the raindrops on my skin
Mm-hmm.
just told me that there was something underneath this withdrawal experience, that if I could just get through the withdrawal,
Right.
there might be like a person I recognize under there that I wanted to be. And the struggle was just that withdrawal for me did not take a couple weeks like my doctor had suggested. It took about a year before I started to feel at all stabilized in the world. And I was traveling for part of that time. So, and I did end up getting off all the other drugs, including the ones for the physical ailments. I'm no longer on the Synthroid. I'm not on the sucralfate. I haven't had a prescription drug in my body in almost 5 years.
Wow. You
So
you were a walking mess.
yeah, I was.
Huh. So,
I was a walking mess with things that people said are going to be with you for the rest of your life.
hmm.
And that's what I'm kind of now is so much of my journey, and has just been like, I chose to buy that. I mean, like when I had a doctors tell me when I was 18, 19 that I was, just clinically or chemically resistant depression, and that this was just part of who I was, and I had a chemical imbalance and my brain was just wired differently. Like I took that to heart and believed that there was never ever going to be a time where I was going to get out of this because they told me that. And now in retrospect, I just know what a load of crap that was. I mean, it took a lot of work for me to get out of it, but now it makes me kind of question everything. I also got off all this thyroid medication. Like my thyroid, I had hypothyroidism. That's supposed to be a lifelong thing. But the more work I started doing on myself, the more I started addressing all the trauma and the grief and all the shit that had happened to me. Well, the next thing you know, I'm a healthier person and my thyroid tests are all coming back totally normal and I'm able to get off that drug too. So for me, it was just this very obvious mind-body connection that I started to realize how much power we have to actually heal ourselves. I mean, I'm still all for Western medicine, but I'm also all for holistic medicine as well. And the
Yeah.
idea that these two things can work together in order to help us heal.
Yeah, I understand the frustration in your experience because when I first got my diagnosis on the bipolar, it was literally toss some medications at you, we'll see you in 6 weeks kind of thing, or we'll see you in a quarter. And then when
Just insane.
you're having problems with those, you go back in because you're still going off the rails on this or that behavior. Yep. And, it's true. It's only the people around you that notice it, because otherwise you just seem like this high energy person or whatever, right? Kind of thing. And then it would still throw medications and 11 iterations later, it's like, there's got to be more to this, there's got to be, some different approaches. And thank goodness a lot of that's starting to change. And I'm like you, I'm not anti-pharmaceutical. There are absolutely appropriate uses for, because when you look at mental health issues, it's brain chemistry. Okay, that's all it is. There's just an imbalance of brain chemistry. And so
I'm going to push back on that one.
Okay, go ahead.
How do you measure brain chemistry? Is there a test for it?
Because they don't have one. You're exactly right. They don't
go
in and
test for it.
Yeah, they don't go in and draw blood and say, well, or stick a needle in your head and say, oh, well, this is the problem.
Yeah, we literally don't have a way. Like the chemical imbalance theory has been, at least for depression, and I will definitely make a caveat here saying that the only expertise I have as a patient has been with depression. I don't know anything about bipolar, schizophrenia, and all of that. Sure. But when it comes to depression and the chemical imbalance theory of depression, it has been debunked over and over and over and over and over again. There's no test to measure these so-called imbalances. Yeah. There's a lot of contradictory studies where, like serotonin can be raised, or they say that like serotonin appears to be raised in some people because there's, it's a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. Like basically a lot of the assumptions that are made in these studies are because they're just assuming that these drugs are doing something in the body. Yep. And based on that, they're saying, well, it must be a chemical imbalance. But we also have all of these other studies that don't corroborate that at all. And the bottom line is it's just way more complex than any of us know. And the people who really know this stuff, the neurologists, the researchers for pharmaceuticals and antidepressants, assuming they're not, like being paid off by the pharmaceutical companies, like the independent researchers will tell you, we don't know.
Yeah.
That's why we're studying it, right? But then with marketing and with, our ability to market with people, and it's very convenient to say, oh, you have a chemical imbalance. And like, there's a chance that's true. I don't know, but the bottom line is nobody knows. And to assume that that's what's going on and that that's the reason for all of this, I think is hugely, hugely detrimental to people, because it takes a lot of the personal responsibility away for the state of your life and your existence. And there may be a factor, sure, but it's not the entire factor.
No, I agree.
And I really think that to me, depression is best described as the distance between your true self and your life.
Yeah.
The greater that distance, the more depression exists. But that we don't really live in a society that allows people to truly be who they are.
Yeah.
because from everything from having to, act certain ways and pay bills and wear clothes and do certain things that are expected of us, to the much more, society expects me to be a lawyer and I want to be an artist. Like that's it too. But the closer you can bridge that gap and be in the full truth of who you are, I don't really see people who are really truly living out their soul purpose and their soul existence. I don't see clinical depression in those people. Anecdotal evidence, of course. I see it a lot more in people whose lives don't line up with what they want, but they don't necessarily know how to go about that. They don't know how to fix that. There's no support to go look at the traumas. You don't realize that maybe something that happened to you when you're 3 has created a life that you're not okay with. And so yeah.
Oh, I agree with you in so many ways. I think we've had a mental health industry who they didn't know, so it was throw medications at it and we'll see what happens. You spent 15, 16 years, 17 years dealing with this, which you didn't even have a baseline. Now I know with my medications, if I don't take, there's some behaviors that are not that great, so I'm careful what I do, but I also know that it's not 100%. It just isn't. And it drives me bananas because we probably have a whole generation of people who were dosed and thrown onto these medications that are probably still on them. And I bet you're a rarity, It's what's kind of scary.
I know we do. Yeah. I mean, my inbox is, I wrote an article for the Washington Post about this last year, like right before the pandemic hit. And ever since then, I'm just got constant emails from people with stories that are effectively, I was medicated because of XYZ, and now I'm, everything from my parents put me on Prozac when I was 8 and now I'm 19 to, my husband had an accident when I was 21 and now I'm 60.
Yeah.
And what I noticed through all these things is just that, like, again, when we go back to kind of my philosophy, I think that we're not in a place where we just don't have the resources or coping skills, or a society, frankly. We don't have a society that is going to allow people to process the things that have happened to them in a truly like open and fluid, and I don't want to call it natural or healthy, because it's just, we don't have a way for people to process this stuff. It's not the society we have built. So we have built a society in which we have things we absolutely have to do, and we have medications that people take for a variety of reasons to help them do that. My issue is just that there's no process, or there's no point during this process where we say, okay, well, if we're going to put you on something, we're going to put you on it for 6 months. And then, like, that's the longest these things have been studied. They haven't been studied for 15 years. So at that point, we're going to start pulling you off of them, because the goal here is to help you get through the traumatic aspects of your life, or to work through things, but to ultimately be able to handle your life, on your own. And that's where I think that the change needs to be, is just that if you're being put on these drugs, there should be a plan at the same time of how to get off of them.
Yeah.
Because the problem from my perspective is when I have a 65-year-old calling me saying that they have been on these drugs for 40 years and they can't get off of them, and they're suicidal, and their psychiatrists don't know what to do with them, and their bodies are just completely wrecked. Like, how do you help that person?
Yeah.
And I think there are a lot of people like that. So all I hope for is, it's called safe deprescribing.
Yeah.
It's that there's a conversation about getting off in the same way there's a conversation about getting on.
Yeah.
And that we do it in a really healthy way, because, with my experience with, like Effexor is a perfect example. The smallest dose you can get is 32.75 milligrams. I believe that's the smallest dose. That's a huge drop off. It might be the smallest dose you can prescribe, but it's a huge drop off when that suddenly is not in your brain anymore. So why can't we have a 15 milligram dose? Why can't we have a 7.5 milligram dose and a 1 milligram dose, and tapering strips? And like, why can't there, when we know that people have bad reactions when they're trying to get off these drugs, why can't we have, why can't we help them do it?
Yeah. You know, my level of frustration too with where I'm at, you know, they've changed the DSM and now they call me undefined. Well, that just tells me you don't know what you know what you're
Yeah.
doing, right? I mean, come on,
Yeah.
give me a break. So is your
Yeah.
book, is it around the topic of helping people look at this as far as your, you know, happiness is a skill book that's coming up?
Yeah, so my book that's out for submission right now, it's a memoir. It's about my year of getting off these drugs and antidepressant withdrawal. It was very, very consciously written, and by that I mean it's not it's not a meditation on my own pain. It's not a meditation on, you know, pharmaceutical industry devil. No one should be on it. Like that's
Right,
not
right,
that's
right.
not that's not the message here. It's basically I wrote it because one, um, when I started writing it, there weren't really any anecdotes, and like nobody, unless you've been through this type of withdrawal, you cannot explain it to people in a quick way. And I think
Right.
that's part of the reasons why doctors have struggled so much is because they've never gone through it. And anything mental health related is so hard to measure, and there's this level of like, belief, like are they telling the truth, or also there's confusion, is this their syndrome coming back, or is it withdrawal, or is it maybe a bad interaction between drugs. It's really hard to suss out what is what. So I wrote the book in a way that hopefully gives people an idea of what it feels like to be in withdrawal, and how I sort of the steps that I kind of took to help dig my way out of that. And so it's ultimately, a hopeful book in the end. It's just my story. I don't get into any research or any of the journalistic side of it, because that stuff's changing every single day.
Yeah.
Like, we've actually had some traction on that, and some research is being done since about 2018, 2019. But there's still not that much. So it's pure memoir. It's, if I'm being honest, it's a really difficult sell because I'm not a psychiatrist. I find I run into, I run into situations where people don't want me to talk about this stuff because I don't have a degree,
Yeah.
which to me is infuriating because the patients aren't supposed to have degrees, and this stuff
Yeah,
still
you live
happens
through
to
it, right?
us.
Yeah, you live through it. Well, again, throw out
Yeah.
your social media links or website, whatever you want people to do to get a hold of you or connect with you, please.
Yeah, so my social media is at Brooke Siem, BrookesIem. My website is also brookesiem.com. Most of my social media, if I'm being honest, is about my chef work and cooking because it's light, it's fun. I
Yeah.
really like being able to connect with people over food, and so
So in
after
this,
going through what I've,
go
I was
ahead.
just gonna say, after going through what I've gone through, it's really nice to just be like, let's just make some vegetables because they're
Yes,
delicious and
yes.
good for you.
Or I've got a gel, but I'm not telling you any way how to
Oh
make it,
no,
Rex.
because
Yeah.
yeah, I mean Disneyland doesn't give away the magic either. You don't need to know how the animatronics are made.
That's right. That's right. So real quick before I would get a couple things, when did you get onto the Food Network? When was this?
Yeah. So this was in 2016 is when I
Okay.
filmed. I filmed in 2016. It aired in 2017. Incidentally, I was in really heavy withdrawal when I filmed.
Uh-huh.
I was terrified that I was gonna totally break down on TV, and I didn't break down on TV. I was an absolute wreck of a human being on set that day, and I'm just so grateful that the editors chose not to include any of that in the final cut.
That's great.
But
So
yeah, it was.
you were depressed, but still were able to get around knives. That's impressive, right?
Yeah, it was
Okay. Well,
constant battle.
I want to thank you for coming on. It's been a real genuine journey. So I have one last question that I want to ask you. I ask this of all of my guests. In the Western culture, we have this idea of a bucket list. And in fact, I have met the bucket list guy. Okay. His name is Trav Bell. Okay. And with that, it's a list of things we want to do before we have stepped off the earth. Okay. But there is an opposite to everything. Okay. So if you have a bucket list then of things you want to do, then there's a list of things that you don't want to do. Okay. Now that list rhymes with bucket and starts with an F.
Yeah,
But
are we allowed to swear on this podcast?
whatever you want to do. Okay. So that effort list, I don't say it, I'm kind of a clean approach guy. However, it's just things you don't want to do. And so I'll give you an example or two for me. I'm not going to have pet snakes. I'm not going to eat sardines. Sorry, if you are a sardine chef, that's just not down my alley. And I'm never, ever going to again do a Lakota Sioux sweat lodge. The idea of excessive heat, excessive humidity, excessive drumming and chanting, not going to do it. So what might be an item or two that would be on your effort list?
Well, so the thing is, Rex, is that you have stumbled upon a little side project of mine that I didn't
Okay.
even think to mention today.
Okay.
So,
Well, let's hear it.
you can prepare to have the little explicit filter we put on this podcast. Sorry, kids, but I am have always been delighted by the phrase. Sometimes you just have to chuck it in the fuck it bucket and move on.
There you go.
And so, because of that, I actually created and trademarked the fuck it bucket.
Oh, that's
It is a
awesome.
teeny tiny little bucket charm that says fuck it bucket on it.
Okay. I'm gonna have
And
to get one of those from you. Absolutely.
absolutely, and maybe we can link to that as well. So I have fuck it buckets in gold, silver, rose gold, pewter, and copper. And I have them either on keychains or necklaces or just a little charm. And so my idea of the fuck it bucket is not so much things I don't want to do, but I carry it around and I created this because I have had a tendency to maybe be a little too serious, not have enough of a
Yep.
sense of humor, and really just like get worked up over a
Over
lot
small
of
things. Right. So you
Well,
needed a place to throw things.
legit,
Yep.
yes, or legitimate big things that I just frankly have no control over. So
Yep.
I designed the fuck it bucket because I wanted to carry around a little fuck it bucket charm that just I could just like, if someone was pissing me off in traffic, just chuck it in the fuck it bucket and move on. Listen to some music you like, or even within withdrawal, it was kind of like, this is going to be over eventually. Chuck it in the fuck it bucket and paint today. Like, screw whatever you have to do.
So are those available on your website then?
Yeah. So, well, not, yes, on my website, but fuckitbucket.co.
Okay.
So yes, you can get them on fuckitbucket.co. Also, I have an Etsy shop. If you just search the Fuck It Bucket on Etsy, it'll all come right up. So that is my interpretation of the Fuck It Bucket list, is more just things that, the ability to kind of let things go a little bit more. And
Okay. Well, that's great.
Yeah, so
You've now become lore on my show. There'll be references to this all the time. So that's fantastic. Okay. But I'm still going to pin you down. What might be an
yes,
item or two that you're not going to do? Okay.
just not going to do.
I know one off the top of my head because we spent 45 minutes talking about it. Not going back on.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I'm not going to go back on any
meds.
psychiatric drug at this point. I mean, look, I'm also smart enough to never say never.
Yep.
I don't know what the universe has in store for me down the road, but assuming I am in any of this current state of mind that I'm in now, that's not something on my to-do list in any way. Honestly, I'm not sure I would at this point ever quote unquote get a real job.
Okay.
I have been working for myself or freelancing since the last real job I had where I got like, my taxes taken out for me was in 2009. And ever since then, I've been working for myself in one form or another. And I really love the freedom of freelancing. It's there are certainly some pain in the butt aspects to it, but I love that I can decide to take a couple weeks off and work remotely and do a bunch of different projects that interest me. So I don't think I could ever truly work for like a real job in a corporate environment ever.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for coming on the show today. You've been a delight to hear your story. Well, so many people need to hear your story about what you've done, getting off of the psychotropics and those types of things. And your journey being a chef and all those great things. So what a delight. So thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Well, folks, we're going to call that a wrap for this episode. We're thankful that you tuned in to us, if I could talk today. Don't forget to stop by the show website, rexandrewshow.com. Information on all of our guests, current, past, present, future. And so appreciate you tuning in. So until next time, I will say the things that I say at the end of every episode. Be safe, but be bold, and make it a great day.